Hey everyone, Kumar Dattatreyan here with Agile Meridian. We're up to our, I think, 98th or 99th episode of the Meridian Point. And today I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Glenn Marshall, and we're going to be talking about how there are companies out there that manage to be agile, nimble, without using any frameworks. In fact, they probably haven't heard of the Agile Manifesto. And yet, they are some of the most agile, nimble organizations around. So let me bring Glenn into this conversation, and we're going to talk about that. What makes these companies tick? How do they get to where they are, and what can we learn from them?
I think that's a great question, Kumar. I think they probably have heard of the manifesto, but they certainly are not religiously following it. We did some digging this afternoon, and we come up with a couple of points, 3 points actually. I think the first one is customer centricity. It's kind of a simple one, and it's not terribly hard for companies to get to, but a lot of times companies tend to be focused on profit and cost cutting. I've always struggled with that. Of course, you need to keep the lights on. Of course, you need to be profitable. Businesses are not charities. But if your customers are unhappy, that's not going to end well. You may make your quarterly numbers, but unhappy customers are definitely a big problem. And customer loyalty, surveys have indicated that customer loyalty is going down. So companies are not taking care of their customers. And that is a major problem. If you don't care about your customers, they're just going to drift away. So you do need to be customer centric and focus on the customers. A simple way to do this, without getting too deep into agility, is to rank the work that you're doing by customer value. How valuable is this to the customer? Of course, you need to consider effort, so there's an ROI calculation in there. But just doing something as simple as that, I think, will go a long way.
I think that you're definitely right. I mean, of all the companies that are out there that are successful today and are in some way, shape, or form agile, without using frameworks, and there's many of them: Netflix and Amazon and Valve, Buurtzorg, a nursing organization out of the Netherlands, I believe. All of these companies have that as a core premise, is that they are insanely focused on their customer. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a component of that is maybe we're glossing over, is that the mission, the purpose of these companies are such that the people that work there understand that mission, understand that vision, and can personify the customer experience in some way, shape, or form. They are close to their customers. They understand what it is they want and need, maybe even better than the customers do themselves. And so they're able to create experiences that their customers just truly love, and which is why they keep coming back.
I would add a couple of qualifiers, particularly if you're a product company. In order to be responsive to your customers, you need to get product out quickly. And the way you do that is slice it down into small chunks, prioritize those chunks, and continuously get stuff out to the customers. Nothing makes a customer more unhappy than having a bug fix that waits for a year. Definitely not making the customer happy. Of course, there's constraints that you have to work within: financial constraints, regulatory constraints. Obviously, those are constraints. You simply have to pay the cost of doing that, but your focus is on the customer, while of course keeping regulators and so on happy. Technical debt, if you're a product company, that's a thing. So you need to allocate some portion to maintenance, if you will. But other than that, focus on the customer.
You know, I remember my days in the restaurant business, and it strikes me now as we talk about customer centricity that back in those days when I used to run restaurants, our focus was entirely on the customer experience, on the quality of the food that we provided, the speed at which we provided it, the smiles on our waiters and waitresses' faces when they served them their meals. And the job of the managers was to be out on the floor talking to the customers, making sure that they were happy. And I feel that experience taught me a lot about customer experience, and the customer they're the ones that are buying your products or services, right? So In restaurants, it's very easy to see the customer. They're very tangible. They're walking through your door every minute of every day. If you're successful as a restaurant owner or manager, then you have a steady stream of customers that are walking through your doors and ordering your food. And if you have a sit-down place, they're sitting there enjoying a meal with their family or with their friends. It strikes me that we meant people in our educational systems, colleges and whatnot, to be developers, to be product managers, product designers, UX people, and so on and so forth. And there are some companies that really do well with ensuring that these people, when they come out of college and they get hired, understand who their customer is, and maybe they even send them out in the field and have them work with the target audience, if you will. I remember working at a newspaper a while back, and I had to go out and work at a newspaper to see how they set the paper. This is way back. I'm old. Who reads a newspaper anymore, right? But I had to go do that, and I think maybe, I don't know this to be true, but and please comment. When I go out into a client site and they hire me to be their Agile coach, the people there are so far removed from the customer. There's so many layers between them and the customer that how could they possibly build something that is fit for purpose? Because they don't really know.
There you go. I think there are a number of companies that have people regularly go and talk to their actual customers. I think that's an important practice. And I think I can't think of any company where that would not apply and where that is not a good thing. Of course, when you go to an organization, sometimes there's internal customers, but regardless of whatever you're working on, there is a customer somewhere. Find them and make them and make sure they're happy. And they really should be a member of your team, or at least a representative of the customer.
Yeah, so customer centricity definitely is a key factor that makes these frameworkless companies tick, right? So they don't use Agile frameworks, they don't know what Scrum is, but still they're able to respond to changes in the marketplace nimbly with agility and provide great value to their customers. What else?
The second thing is around getting feedback and looking at how you would change your practices and your processes, what the Agile folks call a retrospective. But this is where there's a little bit of humility needed. Nobody knows everything about everything. Things are always changing. Customers are changing as well. The marketplace is changing. Nothing is ever really perfect or finished. And worse than that, the world is changing. So you have to be open to changes to your process and your practices. And that's where the retrospective comes in. The notion of experimentation. You may not know, well, just do an experiment and try it. There's no such thing as a failed experiment, assuming you show up. An experiment that does not work out as expected has eliminated a possibility. So experimentation and retrospectives are critically powerful, so you're continuously improving.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's the spirit of continuous improvement, right? Kaizen, if you want to call it that, from the lean folks. Small improvements over time yield significantly large results, which is what allowed industries to flourish in Japan, especially, and provided sort of a litmus test for the U.S. auto industry to emulate back in the 80s and 90s. I also think that these companies that are naturally agile, nimble, and lean, they may not use these words, but you're right, they have that built into their culture, that they're always looking, examining at how things worked and how they might make it better, and using those lessons to conduct these experiments, whether they call them experiments. We're using that language. Who knows what they're using, right? Mm-hmm. They may use their own internal vernacular to describe these types of events, these expect and adapt events, as some of us have called it. What do you suppose is needed to have that sort of introspection, that humility to question the way things work and ways to make it better? That's
a good question. I would say it's a mindset. Just be constantly curious, constantly questioning, and recognize that nobody knows everything, like I mentioned earlier. Your example about Japan is an interesting one. Absolutely, Japan had nailed it in terms of building cars with a few number of defects, with a smaller number of defects than North America. But I'm rather fascinated by what's going on today. As there's several different major manufacturing groups. Japan is one of them, and everybody's going to EVs except for the Japanese. They are the furthest behind. So in terms of continuous improvement, they certainly did that in the small, but in terms of the large at the executive level, they have, I would say they're very behind, and they're in for a lot of pain because they are so far behind.
Yeah, I think maybe the Japanese auto industry is maybe a little less resilient and adaptable than we thought they would be, right, in the face of change, where China has emerged as this juggernaut, threatening to take over the entire world with their cars that are produced with quality and much cheaper than the Japanese, the US or the Europeans can muster. So it's going to be an interesting time over the next 10 years or so. Not to get into politics too much, but personally, I don't believe the tariffs are going to do anything except drive up costs for us here in the U.S. But that's another point. So go ahead.
But there's an interesting point here. I still think the Japanese do make excellent cars,
yes,
using some outdated technology, in my humble opinion. So in the small, they're still very, very good and still producing very, very good cars. But at some level, they stop looking at the big picture. So it's interesting. Yeah. You can get the small details right, but miss the big picture.
Right. And I think maybe they're starting to play catch up. And when they do, they have all that manufacturing prowess that will hopefully keep them competitive with the rest of the world. But I was really looking at, what makes a company sort of, what are some of the cultural habits, if you will, that make a company more or less able to examine themselves in the way that they work and examine how they work and look for improvements everywhere. What is that? What is that ingredient that may be missing in companies that rely on frameworks to do this for them?
I think a critical aspect is the notion of autonomy with alignment. So you have an alignment around certain goals. A big one would be make sure your customers are happy, but you have autonomy in terms of how you achieve it. Of course, you're going to be measured on it, but the focus really is on delegation and letting teams make their own decisions. Notion of dialing up the authority and the capability of teams. A huge factor here is cross-functionality. In my coaching work, I sometimes talk about finance. Well, if there's a lot of financial components on a team, I work with software a lot. Bring a person from finance onto the team. Have them actually a full-fledged team member, perhaps part-time. Legal is perhaps a better example. Sometimes there's a lot of legal or audit aspects. Bring them on the team. It's way more efficient, and then the team can do everything, and this is what you want. Another factor is psychological safety. That's huge. Everybody has to be free to speak up without fear of humiliation or punishment. And sometimes you don't see that in some organizations.
Yeah. I think you're touching on a lot of different facets of this set of characteristics. You talked about alignment with autonomy, and we talk a lot about this notion of alignment with autonomy in X scale. And I think to have that, you have to have a culture that values trust and autonomy, autonomous teams, right? And values that more than other things, maybe more than hierarchy or whatever level you have. A culture that rewards and supports decentralized decision making, so that the people closest to the work can make decisions, even if it's a wrong decision. It facilitates learning, because you're going to learn that was a wrong decision and you're going to make a better decision the next time. Well, what do you say to that?
There's a couple of points there. First of all, things are so complex and moving so quickly these days that hierarchy just isn't responsive enough. You simply have to have distributed decision making, or you're going to be behind. It's just too slow. It's just too inefficient, and the people at the top don't know everything. They're very bright, of course, but they can't know everything. So this is why you want to push decision making down as close to the person who is receiving the information as you possibly can. This is a big deal, though. I'd like to read very briefly about a practice on self-management, if I may.
Sure.
This principle is called the advice process. And under the advice process, the basic idea is that anybody can make any decision, including spending company money. But first, that person has to seek advice from, number one, people who have experience about the topic. And if we're talking about spending money, that would include financial folks doing cost-benefit analysis and so on. And number two, from those people who will be meaningfully affected. That is, they will have to live with the decision. The decision maker must consider all advice seriously, but the goal is not to make a watered down compromise. After careful decision making, the decision maker chooses what they see as the best course of action, even if that means going against a piece of advice received from a colleague. So if somebody has a burning desire, let's say they're working on the assembly line, we can get a better machine to do this. Well, talk to finance, talk to the people who are using that machine, come up with a good case, and then just spend the money. As long as you consult, you can spend money. This is kind of a litmus test. If teams are allowed to spend money, that's distributed decision making, and that's autonomy. If they're not, it ain't.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, but it seems kind of radical, right? For at least companies that are not, and we should talk about some examples of companies that are agile without using frameworks. But for those that do rely on frameworks to sort of stimulate this type of a culture, that can be hard to do.
It is, and this is a radical. Using a process like this is a radical change. And the way I would suggest that to start on that is get one of your best teams and give them some autonomy. Start small, prove it works, and then scale it up. This is going to be extremely disruptive to the organization. There's no question about it.
Right, and especially for a public company, for having to allow employees to spend money, that may be a difficult thing for a traditional company to go. But there are probably other ways you can go. You can go pretty far in terms of decision making without the financial aspect of it. Wouldn't you agree?
You could do it in phases. You could empower teams up to $5,000 or $10,000 or something, and then as it works out, you increase it. The idea is to trust your people, and if your people are not trustworthy, then why are they there? I've seen in a number of organizations, it seems they have some people that seem to be less than capable, and what they do, they hire a supervisor. Well, really? How's that going to help? You're just making the problem worse because you're adding overhead.
Yeah. And Peter Merrill with Xscale, he talks a lot about the, how does he put it? The doer-decider distance?
Yep.
Right? Can you want to explain what that is? I have an idea, but I don't remember how he puts it.
I'm going to just be going from memory as well, but it relates exactly to this concept. The person doing the work versus the person making the decision, you want that distance to be as short as you can make it. You don't want 5 levels of hierarchy. You may have to have 1 or 2, but you want it as short as you can make it. So this gets into the notion of delegation and empowerment and all that sort of stuff. I would like to just add a comment on what I said a moment ago, and that is in terms of radical organizational change. This is not about hurting people and cutting people left and right. In fact, I'm very unhappy with the organizations that seem to think that this is the way to go and grow their companies by whacking people. This has to be done in a humane way. Introduce it, explain what's going on for people who were former decision makers who now will not have a role. Give them a chance to go and find another role within the company. The recommendation is a year. And if that doesn't work, give them a package. But at all times, you have to treat people with respect. And sadly, this seems to be out of fashion with many companies these days.
Right, because people are a resource.
People are not resources. People are people. Machines are
I know.
resources.
That's the prevailing notion, right? It's a resource. It's a human resource, but it's just a resource.
It's what the company is made of. The company is made of people.
Right. No, you're preaching to the choir here. I was trying to get you riled up, and evidently I did. So maybe an example of a company that sort of has charted their own way to agility. And I don't even know if they call it agility. It's just their way of working, their operating model. Let's say, is there an example of a company that you'd like to speak about?
The company I kind of, that seems to be the most advanced in terms of these practices would be Buurtzorg, the Dutch nursing company. They have something like 9,000 nurses, and they have 50 people that are not nurses providing support. 50 people for 9,000. So they are practicing taking this agile agility notion very, very seriously. They and the amazing thing is that their costs are much, much lower, and people are leaving traditional nursing organizations in droves to join these.
So how does that work? How do 8,950 people just go nurse without any supervision?
They are self-supervised. The basic model is a nursing group. So they obviously have to have some senior people, some less senior people, and some specializations. I'm not sure how it works with doctors. Do they have doctors on the team or not? But the basic idea here.
Well, it's all nurses.
No doctors. Okay.
Yeah, all nurses. They will operate in teams of up to 12. If it grows beyond 12, then at some point they split into another team. And these are self-contained, self-managing teams of nurses. Mm-hmm. If it goes below 6, then they merge with another team.
Okay.
And so that's their structure. It's almost like an organism of cells, right? That the cells can't be much more than 12 people, and they can't be much less than 6.
And here's the thing: an organization is like an organism.
Yeah.
And treating it hierarchically, it really is not reflective of the way things actually work.
But it's not as simple as say, okay, let's take, an example. Just pick a company. I don't know. I'll just pick a company. And this is not meant to pick on any company. I'm just going to pick one, IBM. And they have, say, 100,000 people. And it's not to say that, okay, let's fire all of the managers, only leave 50 managers. And 59,050 people, you guys self-organize into teams of 12, and all of a sudden IBM's going to run like Buurtzorg. No, lots of things have to be in place in order for that type of a structure to work.
Correct. And the way I would recommend going about it is pick some strong people that basically build up a cross-functional team of quite strong people, and then gradually give them more and more ability and more power. Target, I believe, has this model. They have like an innovation lab of coaches, and if you want to go and introduce agile practices to your team, your whole team goes into the innovation lab and stays there for 6 months while they learn this under intense supervision, and then they go back to where they were. So
you're talking about Target. Is that Target you're saying?
Yes.
Would you say that they are a naturally agile company, or they have implemented a framework?
I would say this is part of their journey. The critical thing to keep in mind here is this is a journey. I don't think they're there yet, but I thought that it was a good way to go and introduce these practices.
Right. Okay.
They're under intense monitoring, and people have to actually apply to go to the innovation lab, and they're interviewed in that. So it's like an honor, and when you I guess you graduate in a sense, and then you go back to do your work, but differently.
I would love to learn more about that, maybe in a future talk that we have, just about their journey, and maybe some companies that didn't start out like, say, Buurtzorg or Netflix or whatever, and have had success with frameworks. There are plenty of them, right, that have had success with frameworks. But I wonder if you compare them side by side with an organization like Buurtzorg, how would they stack up, right? How nimble is Target compared to, say, a Buurtzorg or a Netflix? how adaptable are they? How valued do the people feel? How compensated do the people feel? And most importantly, how much value are they? The perception of value from a customer standpoint, is it comparable?
This is I think you're coming back to what I see as the difficult question, and that is delegating decision making. Birdsong has done that to an extreme degree. That I think they're lighting a path for other companies to follow. But I don't want to diminish how hard it is to go down that path. It's going to require CEO support, and it's going to require a lot of courage, and it's going to be very disruptive. And the people who are disrupted will be very unhappy and very vocal about it.
Yeah, I'm just reading a little bit as you're talking about Birdsong, and I mean they really have. If you look at xScale and the principles of xScale, and if you don't know what those are, just go into our channel. Script, the xScale principles script, as they organize their company. It's a very flat structure, hardly any. There's really no hierarchy as a company, because each team of nurses, they obviously play specialized roles. Someone handles the finances within that little team of nurses. Someone does the planning and coordination and so on and so forth. But they figure out how they're gonna work in that team of 12. And the support staff is there merely to support these teams of nurses that number 9,000 people, right? Divided by 12. They are focused on patient care, number one. So it's really a very customer-centric approach. The decision making is, if you look at doer decider distance, it is probably zero, because each person on the nursing team has the authority to make a decision in that moment that serves their customer in the best way possible.
Maybe we should give a little bit of background on Birdsong. I don't know about the US, but in the Netherlands, there's a large home nursing practice that has been in place for, I think, over 100 years. This is a good thing because hospitals are very expensive. And if you can keep somebody in your home and keep them safe and happy and comfortable, this is a great thing. Modern measurements of efficiency and effectiveness was what was being used in the Netherlands before. And the nurses hated it, and the customers hated it, the patients, because they would always get a new nurse and they had like 2 minutes to change a bandage, 2 minutes to do this, 2 minutes to do that. They didn't build a relationship and they hated it. But Birdsong has this holistic practice whereby they even talk about bringing in neighbors to go and check on an elderly person if they're alone, for example. So they're looking at the whole picture. The clients love this, and the killer is they're much cheaper.
Right. I mean, there are challenges, of course, with the decentralized nature of an organization like that. Is how quickly can they respond to major events like COVID? I'd be curious to learn more about how Birdsong responded to COVID, because there's no one central decision-making authority. It is distributed, right? So does each nursing team make their own decision as to how they provide care? How is that coordinated? And then we don't have to answer that. It's just a curiosity in my head, right? I believe that they probably did just fine, but I would be curious to learn more.
I have a bit of information on that.
Okay.
They collaborate between each other extensively between the teams, and they can make suggestions. And there's people who are interested, for example, in COVID, so they'll have a COVID interest group or something like that, and they'll make a proposal. But all the teams have to buy into it, and the CEO will also make proposals. But again, everybody has to buy into it. And typically, there's a lot of feedback, so that you end up making really high quality decisions because there's this vigorous back and forth. Again, the doer-decider distance is so short, so there's a lot of good feedback. So
that's interesting, because if it's a consensus-based decision model, that could take time, to get consensus from 9,000 teams to do something COVID related. It takes a long time for information to flow across an organization, whether it's decentralized or not. Decentralized may make it a little quicker, but to make a decision based on that and have everyone agree, I'm curious. Now I'm more curious.
But the idea is somebody would feel passionate about this. Hey, look, we've got a crisis. They would connect with a couple of people they respect that make a proposal quickly, that put it out, and people who care would comment. If you don't care, then don't worry about it. Let somebody else.
I can see that, where if it follows the advice protocol that you read from the Frederick Lew's book, Reinventing Organizations, then I can see that working, because some passionate people come up with a proposal, everyone is like, yay, let's do this, or if there's a counter proposal that comes in, but the decision making is much quicker, because as you and I both mentioned, the do or decider distance is very low in an organization like that.
I've worked in companies that will go, I'm not sure which one is better. Okay, you try that and you try the other one.
Yeah.
And we'll have a contest. I used to work for Sun Microsystems. I was always very intrigued that they would sometimes have two engineering teams working on the same thing at the same time, trying two different approaches. And then they have like a contest to see which one was best. So,
Glenn, it's getting to be 30 some minutes at this point, so we probably need to cut this fairly soon. What is your takeaway? What can we take to a traditional organization to say, hey, you need to be more like Bertsorg? And they're going to laugh in your face and say, get the heck out. They might use other choice language. I don't know.
The critical thing with these practices is that it's a journey. Don't do it all it's not like add water and stir instant change. That simply is not the way to work. I would start by introducing customer centricity. Just doing that alone will have tremendous benefits, and then it'll lead to other ones. The customers would, if you were taking a long time to deliver a product, the customers would complain, hey, but we're supposed to make our customer happy, then we better go and deliver more quickly. And the way you deliver more quickly is by slicing things down. So an awful lot of things just flow from that simple thing. And that's where I would say companies would start. The other stuff, leave that till later. One of the practices of improving is to be agile about improving, which means don't do everything at once. So just pick one thing, and that's the one thing I would pick. When you've got that nailed, then we can talk about the next one.
That is good advice, and I think that's a good place to start, because if an organization, a department, a division within a company, whatever, right, one single product line starts to practice being more customer centric, it's going to trickle throughout the organization. It's going to require that people make decisions that are more local rather than global. It's going to require that leaders the other way around. So I think that's a great place to start. Anything else you'd like to add before we end this one?
I will add that this will present a challenge, because so many companies are focused on quarterly results. You need to go and keep the lights on. You can't not make profit. But if you take a bit of a longer view, you can add customer centricity in there as well. But the financial folks might have a bit of a challenge with this.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that is definitely a challenge. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Meridian Point. And as usual, I always enjoy talking to you, Glenn. So we will see you for our next Glenn and Kumar episode on topics around X-Scale and business agility in about a month. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.